All right, let's dive straight into this explainer and demystify one of the absolute oldest, most powerful, and frankly, most complex deities in all of human history. We're looking at Inanna, who you might also know as Ishtar, the ancient Mesopotamian queen of heaven. Now, if you think you've got ancient mythology figured out, you might want to brace yourself, because she is going to completely subvert your expectations. We're going to break down her unprecedented rise to power, her quite frankly shocking mythology, and a hidden legacy that literally still shines down on us today. Let's get into it.
So think about this for a second. Who was the ancient deity that ruled over romantic love, but also brutal slaughter? I mean, to our modern minds, right, those two domains seem entirely incompatible. We're so used to putting our love goddesses in one neat little box and our war gods in another. But we're about to explore a figure who commanded both the battlefield and the bedroom, and she absolutely defied every single category her society tried to place her in.
This really gets right to the heart of her character, this ultimate contradiction. On the one hand, she's the patron of sensual love, sexuality, and procreation. But then, right on the flip side, she's the goddess of war, political power, and actual carnage. We're talking ancient hymns that literally describe her as stirring up chaos against her enemies and untiringly strapping on her sandals for battle. I mean, she was the ultimate duality.
Moving into Section 1, the first great goddess and her rise to power in ancient Mesopotamia. Now, when we map out her incredible longevity, we have to start way back at the very dawn of human civilization. We're talking around 4000 BCE during the Sumerian Uruk period. Her worship spanned thousands of years. She survived rising empires, massive invasions, huge cultural shifts, and she remained incredibly dominant all the way until her gradual decline between the 1st and 6th centuries CE, right in the wake of early Christianity. I mean, honestly, that is a staggering reign for any deity. What's super fascinating here is how her identity actually transformed over time. Originally, scholars think the Sumerian goddess Inanna and the Akkadian goddess Ishtar were entirely separate deities. But then, right in the middle of history, around 2334 BCE, the legendary conqueror Sargon of Akkad effectively brings these cultures together. He and his successors really pushed this process called syncretism, basically blending the two goddesses together until people regarded them as the exact same unstoppable force. So she goes from being the Sumerian Lady of Heaven down in Uruk, all the way to the absolute highest deity in the mighty Assyrian pantheon. Talk about a major elevation, right? All right, on to Section 2, the ambitious goddess, looking at her myths of power and rebellion. The crucial takeaway here is that unlike a lot of other gods who had very static, limited roles, Inanna completely broke the mold. Look at what she's not. She was not a mother goddess. And despite being the goddess of love, she wasn't the goddess of marriage either. Instead, ancient texts paint her as young, super independent, fiercely ambitious, and just constantly moving from conquest to conquest. She was always taking over the domains of other deities. Basically, she was a massive disruptor. To really prove her dominance, though, she needed the ultimate prize. In ancient Mesopotamia, this prize was called the Ems. These were the sacred properties that literally allowed human civilization to exist. It's like the ultimate master key. We're talking everything from truth, writing, and law to things like prostitution, weaponry, and kingship. And Inanna wanted them. So she travels down to the city of Eridu to visit Enki, the god of wisdom, who was guarding these powers. And what happens next plays out like an absolute, thrilling heist story. It's one of the most entertaining myths from antiquity. She doesn't fight Enki, she outsmarts him. She gets him involved in this massive drinking competition, and once the god of wisdom is just completely intoxicated, she actually convinces him to hand over the Mez. She loads them all onto the boat of heaven, literally steals the building blocks of civilization, and rushes them back to her own city of Uruk. It is such a perfect showcase of her rebellious, ambitious nature. But we also have to remember her ambition had a terrifying, destructive side. You can hear her genuine, chilling voice in the myth of Mount Ibith. So she comes across this magnificent, towering mountain in the Zagros range. And instead of, admiring it, she gets absolutely infuriated. She looks at its natural beauty and its sheer height as a direct insult to her own authority. Even when the sky god An tells her to just leave it alone, she totally ignores him and utterly destroys the mountain. It's just a brutal reminder of her wrath.
Which brings us to Section 3, Descent into the Underworld, Stripped of Power and Reborn. The narrative tension in this famous myth is just incredible.
Inanna demands entry into the underworld, and she's fully decked out in her royal garments and jewelry, and each item actually represents one of her powerful Mies. But the underworld has its own rules. She has to pass through 7 distinct gates, and at every single gate, the gatekeeper forces her to remove a piece of her royal attire. So by the time she reaches step 4, standing right in front of her sister, Ereshkigal, she is completely naked, totally vulnerable, and she's been systematically stripped of all her heavenly power. And the consequences are, well, they're brutal. Her ambition finally catches up with her. The 7 judges of the underworld deem her guilty, look upon her with the look of death, and the vibrant, totally unstoppable goddess of love and war is abruptly struck down. She's turned into a corpse and literally left hanging on a meat hook for 3 days and 3 nights. It is a stunning, shocking defeat for a deity who seemed completely invincible.
But of course, you know the story doesn't end there. She's eventually rescued thanks to the cleverness of Enki, who creates these 2 sexless beings to sneak down and revive her with the food and water of life. But here's the catch. She can't just leave. The demons of the underworld demand a substitute. So she ascends back to the surface, and what does she find? Instead of her husband, Dumazid, mourning her death, she finds him just lavishly resting on her throne. So showing that trademark ruthlessness, she doesn't even hesitate. She just hands him right over to the demons to take her place in the underworld. Boom.
Section 4. The Epic Legacy. Echoes of the Paradoxical Queen.
You see, her reputation as a very dangerous lover was well known across the ancient world. In the standard Akkadian version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, literally one of the oldest pieces of literature we have, Ishtar actually proposes to the hero Gilgamesh, but Gilgamesh refuses, and he throws her ruthless past right back in her face. He just lists out all her former lovers, starting with Tammuz, which is just another name for Dumuzid, and reminds her that, hey, loving you usually ends in death, crazy transformations, or eternal wailing. No thanks. But her influence certainly didn't stop in Mesopotamia. That mythological blueprint was exported everywhere. She directly influenced the Phoenician goddess Astarte, who then fundamentally shaped the famous Greek goddess of love, Aphrodite. Yeah, you heard that right. The Greek goddess of love actually has her deepest roots as an armed, terrifying warrior goddess from the Near East. In fact, the ancient Greeks over in Sparta worshipped a version of Aphrodite who was fully armed for battle. Plus, Aphrodite absorbed Ishtar's sacred symbol, the dove, and that tragic Greek myth of Aphrodite and Adonis, it's pretty much a direct mirror of Inanna and her doomed husband Dumazid.
But here is where it gets really wild. Her legacy isn't just locked away in ancient texts or borrowed by other cultures, it's literally written in the cosmos. Modern researchers and astrologers recognize that her myth is a direct mirror of the planet Venus. Think about it. Inanna's descent into the dark underworld and then her dramatic return to the heavens perfectly maps onto how Venus sets in the west, completely disappears from the sky, and then dramatically rises again over in the east. And it builds into this absolutely astonishing astronomical fact. The number 7. 7 gates of the underworld. 7 pieces of clothing removed. Well, do you know what happens in the sky? 7 days. That is the exact amount of time retrograde Venus completely disappears from the evening sky before it reappears as the morning star. I mean, the astronomy lines up flawlessly with her mythological time spent dead in the underworld. Connecting this 4,000-year-old story to the natural world just beautifully grounds this incredibly ambitious, gender-fluid, entirely paradoxical character right into the sky above us. The ancient Sumerians were looking up at Venus, watching its really strange, discontinuous movements across the horizon, and they anthropomorphized it into the absolute most complex, fiercely independent deity of their time. She was the morning and the evening star, forever cycling between brilliant, dominating power and dark, vulnerable descent.
So I want to leave you with this thought to wrap up the explainer. The next time you look up at the night sky and you spot the planet Venus shining brightly up there, what are you going to see? Are you just going to see a simple celestial body reflecting the sun? Or will you see the ancient queen of heaven? Honestly, it kind of makes you wonder how much of our modern world's passion, ambition, and conflict is still being guided by the blueprint of the very first great goddess. Just something to keep in mind the next time you gaze up at the stars.